meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law. Now therefore be it resolved, the New Kent County School Board hereby certifies that to best of each member's knowledge and only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements by Virginia law were discussed in closed meeting to which this certification resolution applies, and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed or confirmed by the New Kent County School Board.
Okay, thank you. Do I hear a motion to approve the certification of the closed session?
I move we approve the certification of the closed session.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, motion carries. All right, first item on the agenda is CARES Act. Dr. Nichols?
Yes, and you should have a one-pager that has CARES Act funding. So put it into 3 different buckets. The first, and I just want to take the opportunity to thank Mr. Hathaway from the county, Chief Opet, Chief Baber, and Kim Turner for being such great partners with our CARES Act funding. The county received CARES Act funding. The school division has also received CARES Act funding directly. The school division received about $214,000. That money for the school division is through December of 22. So we have 2 years, basically over 2 years, to spend that money. That money we're looking at is to really bring some pretty dynamic summer programming to the school division. So we've also partnered with the county on CARES Act funding. What you can see on your sheet, round 1, that's CARES Act funding that we have received from the county. So you can see MiFi setups, the Wi-Fi devices, 10 backpack sprayers, so 2 per school and 2 for transportation. Those are the disinfecting sprayers. The Wi-Fi scatter connections, we also call them our Wi-Fi buses, although they won't always be on a bus. So to push a Wi-Fi signal out into the community. USB thumb drives and duplicators, that's to help with students who don't have internet access. Can we download the material and do exchanges? And then PPE for staff. So whether it's masks, sanitizer, wipes, cleaning, and so forth. So you can see that our first round of CARES Act funding was focused on technology and also mitigating strategies. So that is CARES Act funding that we have received. The next line.
Before we
Go ahead.
Before
Yes.
we go any further, because this, again, everybody, we always sort of get caught up about the fact that it's a school board meeting. This is a work session. So everybody feel comfortable asking questions in between, okay?
Absolutely.
So could you ballpark what we asked for? Like what was our original ask compared to what we received?
Sure. So our original ask, and we didn't have, in our original ask, one of the things that we didn't have is a cost for PPE. We just really worked, and that's why I thank Chief Opet and Chief Baber on the beginning of this. We worked with them on what we needed, and they just got it together and then gave us a total afterwards. So the thing that we asked for that we did not receive is really in round 2. So you'll see it again. And that was laptops for staff. So our staff will be doing more creation of content, whether it's virtual, blended learning, so forth, that we really needed a different standard. The desktops that they currently have in the Chromebooks really just don't meet that need. It's fine for a student, but not for a staff long-term. So that $226,000 that you see in round 2 was actually in round 1.
Okay.
Does that help, Dr. Harding?
Yes.
Okay.
So we really were close, our ask was close to 500,000.
It was right around 500,000.
And
Yes.
we received 265.
Yes.
And I think that gives us a better foundation for what round 2 requests are, okay?
Yes.
So we'll be looking at what our requests are versus what we receive.
Correct. So the round 2, this is not an exhaustive list because it's not due until Friday. We just wanted to show you our current thinking and also just kind of talk through this because it is a work session. You'll see that really the focus here primarily is on the technology side to sort of close some of those gaps. We want to do 20 new installs to improve wireless connections throughout the building, specifically in gyms and cafeterias. So as we look to stand up potential internet cafes and things like that, we need a much stronger wireless signal in those common area spaces. So that is a piece. You
So,
see-
so do we think that, by having that, and I'm looking at Matt, so I'm looking at him. So by having those new installs in large spaces, that will handle any issues we have with dead zones in the buildings, you think?
Yeah, those are existing spaces that don't have coverage,
Okay,
so the installs are to cover those areas for the
Okay.
density, not just for what we need now, but for any future we want to do.
do we have an idea county-wise, because we're on the county system, correct? In terms of internet?
No,
We're not, we're in our own
we
system.
have our own.
So are we concerned about like, amount in terms of computer usage?
As far as total peak bandwidth availability?
Yeah.
We have a very good partnership with Cox.
Okay,
And if we need increased bandwidth, we have that availability
okay,
to put that in place.
okay.
I don't anticipate it being an issue in the building.
We've also talked about pushing the signal specifically at the high school out into the front parking lot further, all the way to the tennis courts if need be, if we need to do some mobile work or use of parking lots or be outside, some of those different things that we may end up doing at some point, really just to kind of close some of those gaps as well.
Thank you.
You'll see the laptops, those are staff laptops, really designed at a level to be able to do virtual learning, blended learning, content creation, and so forth. So really feel like that's critical. CrowdStrike, for those of you that remember the cyber attack that started last year, CrowdStrike is the software that we purchased that helps with the filtering, virus containment, and so forth. The price tag you see there would be for CrowdStrike to go with those laptops. So just keep an eye on security. Chromebooks would be to start a Chromebook refresh. And Matt can talk a little bit more about where that would be. But a lot of our Chromebooks are coming to end of life cycle, and not all are used on a daily basis in the way they would be this year. So we do anticipate more loss, more damage, more wear and tear, basically, on our devices. And this is the first year that we let 6 through 12, or 6 through 11, I guess, keep their Chromebook throughout the summer, which now as we're opening up was a very smart strategy. But we know that, once again, wear and tear and so forth. So pretty have the Chromebook piece there. Webcams would be to support our teachers in the delivery of virtual and remote learning. The USB extension stands, I'm not even going to try to talk to, but Mr. Miller and Mr. Hofer are here to help me with that piece. And the last part I want to talk about is substitute costs. With the uncertainty that has been occurring since March, would be to have some building-based substitutes that could cover in case a staff member needs to quarantine, in case of a number of things happen. It's just a different type of sub that we will need this year due to the different type of learning and teaching that will be occurring. So that would be a 90-day sub cost to cover each of the buildings so they have that flexibility and we can continue to deliver instruction.
So looking at the round 2, where there was only like.
So the webcams, those would be located in the buildings, or those would be deployed to teachers outside of the building?
Yes, and all of the above.
Okay,
Yeah.
To use in and out.
okay.
They basically be assigned to each teacher, so that they have the ability to have them.
So this round of funding, you're due to submit it Friday this week. When do you expect to hear back?
I can get the specific timeline on that. It gets turned in this week, And then sometime next week or the week after, I actually have to go in and present why we need these, similar to round one. And then these ultimately go before the Board of Supervisors for approval. So it'd be connected. These are things that would not be here for the first day of school to start, just because of the timing. But great question. I'll send the board the specific timeline.
But this money is coming directly from the Board of Supervisors, is that correct?
This is from the County CARES Act funding. And like round two, this is just a request. And this may not be the final thing that we put in, but I just wanted to show you where we are in our thinking. And we can make adjustments based on feedback we receive.
Do you know if the county has, so we need to know when the county has to submit it.
Mhm.
And if we're going to be having a meeting with the Board of Supervisors, one of the things we're working on is a joint meeting with them. It would be great. I don't know when that date was. It would be great for us to be able to talk to the Board of Supervisors about this too. It should be.
I'm thinking, it should fall in that same timeline. That shouldn't be an issue, but we'll double check that. Because we're trying to do the joint meeting before September 8th, which is only a few short weeks away. 3 weeks from tomorrow, as a matter of fact.
Right.
Yep. But we can do that, joint CARES Act new school.
Yes, that'd be great.
And when these are submitted, are they prioritized?
Yes. So we put a high, medium, low priority on those. And we work collaboratively with the county, Mr. Hempel and I. Actually, I think we have a meeting on Wednesday, and we'll talk through these as well and kind of prioritize the different projects. And potentially partner with the county on some projects that they have as well.
Now, has the county already received this money?
Yes. So the county's received 2 rounds of CARES Act funding. Whether they have this in their possession right now or not, I'll have to double check. Yeah, they've received 2 rounds of $2 million. So it's 4.2, I think is somewhere around, which has been a point of discussion with superintendents about school CARES money and other CARES money.
Well, it looks like if what I see next on the list, state care set aside
Yes.
headed. So if schools get money, they have to submit a grant. But if the county gets money, they don't have to submit a grant?
So yes and no. So the school division received, and coincidentally, it's around the same price, $214,000 that was given to us that we get to decide how we spend. We do have to put in an application, but it's not competitive. Every school division, based on their free and reduced lunch numbers, received an allocation of funds. What you see in front of you is the State Department, the VDOE specifically, set aside, and I want to say it was like 10% of the total CARES Act funding, for school divisions to write competitive grants for. I will tell you, as a small school division, the amount of work that goes into writing one of these grants sometimes is not worth the total amount of money that you're going to receive. The man hours, and these are grants we don't know that we will actually receive. And you can see some of them are really pretty small.
I just think it bears saying that that's an awful lot of work for you guys to do on top of everything else you have to do to receive money you should have received anyway.
Dr. Harding, one more point on the county funding is their spending timeline is not as lengthy as ours. They have to spend their money by the end of December.
Yeah, so that's a very different, interesting nuance is the county, both round 1 and round 2 have to have it spent by end of December of 2020. Our money, whether it's the competitive or the straight CARES Act money that we receive, which is a fraction of what counties and cities are receiving, we have until December of 2022. So why we have 2 years to spend a fraction of the money is nobody's been able to answer that, but it is important to know that the county's on a pretty tight deadline and we're not at all.
So knowing that legislators are meeting tomorrow, is it I keep saying, could the superintendents talk about this? Could the superintendents talk about that in terms of sharing with legislators that the county has really not enough time. I mean, to spend that money, given what we're thinking about what the fall's gonna be like with COVID.
Yes.
I mean, fall into,
Mhm.
through the winter months. Right?
Yeah, because they can literally spend all their money in December and they need a great deal of it January through March.
Right. I mean, we don't know what December is gonna be, but we don't know what February is gonna be either, and we'll be on the other side of that spending.
Just sounds like somebody made a mistake.
I mean, yeah, December 20
Right.
and then December 22, it's just two totally different timelines for two completely different amounts of set aside funding. But,
I'm surprised.
so you can see our CARES set aside money, the competitive money, and like I said, we'll see. The other frustrating thing about this is that there were points associated with our application. So each one of these had points associated with it. And you are penalized if you're small, and you're penalized if your free and reduced lunch isn't large. So if you're a small rural county with not a large free and reduced lunch, you receive very little of the set aside money. But you're also receiving very little federal money, very little Title I, Title II, this was an opportunity, and rural superintendents really stood together on this one and said, COVID is hitting us all. And it's not just hitting free and reduced. It's not just hitting you if you're large. But really no flexibility was given at that point. So one of the grants we couldn't even participate in because you had to be at least 60% free and reduced. And it was about social emotional. Well, we have social emotional needs too, but we can't even get in that pot of money because we're not meeting that criteria.
Is that federal?
Federal flow through the
Through the
state, so it's a
state,
state, yeah. So that was another frustrating point, working through these grants, is the points associated with it. So I'll update you when we receive notification about these, but I just wanted you to know this is what we had applied for, and we'll see what we'll be able to get. Some of it is guaranteed, the $11,848, that is a special ed sort of set aside, so we know the amount of money that New Kent was getting. And there's one other, I think the cleaning supplies one was also a formulaic percentage.
But none of this is guaranteed, right?
Correct. But you can see it follows a similar theme. We have more Wi-Fi hotspots. The Khajiit are the mobile Wi-Fi hotspots that we utilize buses or different mechanisms to take out in the community. Additional services and supplies, school signage, and so forth. Some of these are things we're going to put in place no matter what. It's just what bucket of money does it come out of. So we're really trying to access the CARES Act money because the operating money and other pieces are not as certain at this point. I just know CARES Act has been a topic of conversation, so just wanted you to see the three different pools. And if you have ideas about round 2 of County CARES Act and we want to do modifications, we have until Friday to submit that.
So, board members, do you have, any questions or thoughts about the round 2 funds? You guys know what you need the most. I just think it's really important that we advocate for that, for you guys. I think.
One of the things that is not in the round 2, especially, or even in the set aside that we may want to consider, this is back to your question, Dr. Harding, about the timing of this. I'm a little bit concerned with all of the athletic competition being pushed to the late winter, to the spring, is that we probably don't have enough provisions made in here of processes and procedures to help these athletic teams to comply with what we potentially need to comply with that could be required by VHSL or even the VDOE, that they could say, for athletic starts, you need to have these things in place. And we don't have any real provisions for locker rooms, for actually athletic equipment, probably additional athletic equipment that may, because, you know, I kind of like at the football level, they were talking about putting shields on, the face mask, which is an additional cost.
Right.
Those type of things, they may have to wear gloves. We don't have any other money that's actually budgeted for that. So that may be one of the considerations at the high school and the middle school level as competition and as they begin practices in the fall and into the winter, that we can kind of do this in a way that protects our coaches as well as our players.
Any other thoughts, questions about round two?
So the 1,400 Chromebooks is about half of our stock of Chromebooks. Is that so that is basically what you all are anticipating being the losses that we need to start to replace?
And you want to speak to the Chromebook piece?
Yeah, the big kick for those is for the elementary layer. So we have devices to give to elementary students. Each break fix is at a cost to us to fix, because they're near the end of life, and we do have a surplus of equipment that we've been using to keep them alive. But that 1,400 is really to get repairable devices to them that we can keep within our current repair cycle. And then it does give us a little bit extra to float to the swaps, because we'll be doing a different swap system with the existing student devices, so that we can keep them fresh, since things are going to be changing. So it's a bit to get the elementary schools flush with better devices that can be repaired better and quicker, and then to provide an overage of those devices that we're going to need to swap out.
And this is all under our current contract?
Yes, ma'am.
Any other? I don't think we said actually that Ms. Daskell is with us. She is with us at a distance.
Yes.
And, feel free to join us at any time, Ms. Daskell. Then that takes us to the VSBA policy revisions. This is our first reading. Alfred Nichols?
Yes, and you have loaded to board docs a continuation of VSBA policies. Last month, we finished round one of the first set of VSBA policies. This is the next set of VSBA policies. So recommendations from the Virginia School Board Association. The different changes are redlined or crossed out in red. So you can see that they're pretty minor as far as changes. So if you want to review those and have any questions prior to the second read, I'd be more than happy to answer those, or if you have any questions at this time regarding those policy changes. So standard VSBA practice to ship policies, and this just keeps us in line with the VSBA recommendations.
And the first link in our on our sheet is an overview of, like, you know, so it's just
Yes.
so if everybody would please look at that, and then if there's something that's in it that you really want to know more in depth, then go to the actual policy and see where the changes. But everybody, please make sure we look at that before we get to a second reading.
Yeah, we did provide you a high-level summary of each
Yeah.
policy and kind of what the change is. So feel free to dive in, ask any questions in between, and we'd be more than happy to get you answers on those.
Thank you for providing that. That's
Yes,
great.
you're welcome.
That is now going to take us to old business that feels like new business, and that is return to learn update. Dr. Nichols.
All right, so good evening again. This is really a continuation and will be a theme of just about every work session and board meeting we have for the near future. So wanted to bring you an update through Return to Learn. So this is what you have in front of you. So when we last left, the board voted for a hybrid approach, and we're very excited about that. This is a slide that I left you with last time, and that was that staffing and health data could lead to modifications to our return to learn plan. That this situation has been flexible and fluid throughout, guidelines change, things shift, that we could make modifications either before school started or after school started, depending on a number of factors. And those modifications could have been elementary is hybrid, secondary is virtual, or we start completely virtual. And that would really depend on health data and staffing data. So want to come before you tonight, just give you an update on both of those, plus a recommendation, because there have been significant impacts since last we met. So the Virginia Department of Health, VDH, has a dashboard. We do not have direct access to it. We actually have to ask for a PDF version from the health department, which I will say publicly is absurd, because we have to make these decisions on behalf of the school division. So what you have is the latest transmission extent by region. We are in the central region. We've now moved to a moderate burden, and the trend is going in the wrong direction. So we're really approaching that substantial community transmission, and we're bordered by our neighbors on the east who are already at that substantial community transmission. So this is a shift in our data over the past month, and the trend as a region, and New Kent as well, is moving in that substantial community transmission. We don't get to a level of detail, and I know we've had board members ask about more specifics on who is testing positive, who is being hospitalized, not who, but age ranges and so forth there. But that our transmission extent is really approaching that substantial community transmission. So as that goes up, the Virginia Department of Health, VACOR, our insurance provider, our risk management firm, we should be looking at other approaches versus in-person learning based on that health data. So as that data trends in a different direction. I have heard unofficially that when 3 regions are red, that they could look at moving to a phase 2 for the state, or potentially for those 3 regions. So just something to kind of keep an eye on. It has really shifted in the past month. The far southwest, for example, had very minimal cases for most of the summer, and is now in that red substantial range. I will tell you that the terminology has changed in the past week. The metrics have changed in the past week. So that can be an incredibly frustrating part of the process as the VDH continues to determine what the metrics are.
Can you give some examples of, so what has changed, what language, what's changed in the last week? What they're calling it as far as a burden Okay.
versus spread. Some of that terminology has changed. Approaching substantial community transmission. So some of those wording pieces, and then the trends associated with them, whether the arrow's going up or down or staying where it is.
So could we make 2 requests?
Yes.
One request is that the health department provide us with this information weekly. If we do not have access to the dashboard, then we should get regular, consistent reports.
Okay.
And then the second request, per the board, is if we could get one level deeper, which is we need more detail.
Okay.
Age, demographic. We need,
Demographic,
right?
yeah.
Is that what you're
Yeah,
thinking?
that was it. Yeah, just the demographic of saying, if we have these positive cases in our community or surrounding communities, which category do they fall in? Do they fall in the higher risk category of 60 and older, or are they lower? And we don't have, they currently do not publish that information. And, you know, the other thing they never have provided for us is, for instance, for the hospitalizations, we don't even know if those people, did they just check in and they were in for 24 hours? Were they in ICU? How long did they stay? You know, those are the type of things that, as we formulate a plan, helps us to know where do we fall in the communities around us as well.
Well, and so that's data that we need to know in order to continue to plan through the fall and the winter. But the other part is after sitting in on a conference call, you know, the one thing that has stood out in all of the planning, and I just, you know, we keep telling you guys, you've just done an incredible job. You just kind of pivot, you know, whatever information comes in from the state, you guys keep working on. But the one thing we've not been able to grasp in any of our plans is our health and safety plan. And I know we might have rubbed some people wrong originally, and we were like, where's our health and safety plan? The community members are asking for, where's our health and safety plan? And I do not feel like the health department provided that to us. When we asked, give us an example of a scenario, if a parent tests positive, if a student tests positive, if a teacher tests positive, give us the protocol. Give us the process. What would happen? What should we do? We didn't get it. Right? Would you agree with that in our call?
Well, in talking to the health department and asking specific questions. So the questions I'm receiving, when would you close the school?
Mhm.
Okay, so health department, when do you close the school? Well, you know, we've never done this before. So, you know, every answer was, it depends. And I do know that it does depend, but there's gotta be a middle road where this is the direction we would go and we would deviate based on these pieces.
Well, and that's been one of the biggest questions that parents have asked. And we've complained about the fact, enough that we know we don't have broadband and you can't make it happen overnight. So here we are. When we want to open schools, we have to have a protocol in place because we're telling teachers and parents, we're telling teachers you're going to be safe, and we're telling parents you're going to be safe, your kids are going to be safe, and yet we don't have a protocol in place. And so it kind of stops on our doorstep again. And so I feel like when I heard that information, I thought we were doing our public a disservice. If we're going to be open, we have to have the health department provide us with protocol.
And I would tell you, our team of nurses, Dr. Paula and her team, really working on their side of the health piece. But you're right, there's a point where our expertise stops.
Right.
And we really need that partnership piece.
Right. And that's no reflection on any of our personnel or any of our staff. I just think we have to turn to the health department for guidelines, and we just didn't get it. So thank you, DCAT staff, for doing as much as you could with what you had.
And did we learn anything this summer from our summer programs when we had students in our facilities? Were there any takeaways?
I think we had a number of takeaways. I don't know if anybody that interacted firsthand with it. Dr. Paula, I don't know if you want to, Dr. Paula really led our summer learning initiatives, and there were a number of lessons as far as screenings. There were a number of lessons as far as isolation, any number of lessons.
Yeah, as I stated earlier, we had about 100 students in our summer programs spread out over the 4 schools. We did have some challenges with keeping masks on, I must say, not only for students, but staff as well. I think that was something that we had to practice. It really is, I hate to use the term case-by-case basis, but it really does come down to that sometimes. We did have all 4 nurses work with us in summer. So we really didn't have situations where we had to close, but we did have to call and seek guidance, for lack of a better term, with the nurses and calling the health department and things like that. But, you have a small number of folks that you're dealing with, small number of students as well as staff members. We also talked about the daily screening, how that would work with more students and staff members. And so in the health plan that we had to submit to the State Department for phase 3, we have to outline what we think we're going to be able to do in those scenarios. And one of the questions in that plan is what triggers a closure? And there is really no one thing, you know what I mean? So And there have been some changes with the guidance from CDC since in the last 3 weeks in the health department too. So on our plan that we submitted, and it's going to be posted on our website this week, I did submit it to DOE today. It still says draft, and it has several revision dates and under draft because we do have to go back and revisit that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Appreciate that.
Thank you, Dr. Pollard. So the bottom line is there's no set metrics from the Department of Education that gives school systems guidance on the things that we're looking for. There's no metrics that says, if you have these many students in this environment, under these conditions, then this is a protocol. And if you have these many teachers and staff, they have not provided us any. And I guess the frustration is because we know that certain businesses and hospitals have operated during this whole time. And you know that they had to come up with a plan of how they have certain metrics that they're using. And I feel like that we have gotten, there are people who have been doing it, but they have not given us any from the public sector, any guidelines to help us use those similar metrics to make informed decisions. And obviously through your conference call, it sounded like that they really didn't give you any insight to.
And this was really, and this dashboard is only a couple weeks old. I think I first saw it maybe 3 weeks ago in its beta state. And like I said, some of the terms will continue to change. This was an effort to move in that direction, but still, as your questions have referenced, it still needs some additional pieces.
Yeah, because you would see that a big region is made up of a lot of counties. And so each county could have a completely different scenario. And so are they just taking the highs and the lows and they're throwing those out and they're using the averages? Because they really don't give us the detail of how they came up with that upward trending.
But just to show you a shift is you now have far southwest and near southwest. In the initial one, the beta one, it was all southwest. They were like, okay, Roanoke is very different from Bristol. You know, there's a lot of territory that is in between. My Southwest geography is not the greatest, but I think that holds true. That's Mr. Miller for that one. But as you can see, we bump right up against some of the eastern pieces that are red. And we have different health departments and different pieces in there. But there is a level that goes down into the New Kent piece, but still not to the level of specificity that you're looking at as well. So that's the health department piece of it. The second part, and really, we've talked about this a lot, that there could be a virtual tipping point when it comes to staff and flexibility. So whether it's ADA, FMLA, FF, Families First Coronavirus Relief Act, FFCRA, those three measures could require school divisions or all employers, but school divisions to provide increased flexibility for staff. And one of the points that we made at our last meeting is we may get to a tipping point with staff and the flexibility that legally we are required to give, that we would not be able to pull off a hybrid model. So that is really where we are. And because it's personnel can't get too deep into it, but we're at a point staffing wise, pre-K-12, that we do not feel like we can adequately staff a hybrid model for students coming in because of the variances and flexibility that we have to provide our staff to keep our staff safe with those provisions that are in place. So I don't know if Ms. Pitts wants to speak more to that.
Well, and I would say that like our department has been working hard to create flowcharts for each individual situation and a guide on how we would case by case look at someone who may be in one of those high risk areas, and then how to navigate through the Families First Corona Response Act and the FMLA and ADA and everything that we need to be able to offer to ensure that they're clear on their pathways. Also, if childcare became an issue, if their place is closed, their daycare or schools. So with all of that, I think it's 28 to 30 pages thick in terms of how we would do those things. And it just keeps each day is another opportunity and another challenge in terms of what our principals will be facing in the classroom with needs and the needs of our staff. And we have some pretty serious staffing needs. And we're very aware of that. So we also are very aware of the flexibility that we will have to offer.
So, Ms. Spitz, can you, or Dr. Nichols, from our last meeting, you had a number that you arrived at that point. And so, can you tell us what that number was that day versus what it is today?
Well, I think the last meeting we were at 35 and now we're at 42. Does that sound right?
Actually, I think at the last meeting, we were at 28 staff, and we knew once we got into the 30s that we would start to have difficulties. I think end of last week, we were at 35 staff, and now we are close to
42.
mid-40s at this point. So trying to staff a hybrid with that many
Absentee teachers.
or accommodations that
Or
need to
staff,
be
I mean-
put in place and the difficulty in substitutes in an age where teaching looks completely different, and even our teachers weren't trained to do, is incredibly difficult. And I think you've seen that across the Commonwealth with school divisions initially looking at a hybrid, because really the best place for kids are in schools for teaching and learning and so forth. But from the safety piece and then the staffing piece, also in health and safety, we're just at a place that we can't effectively accomplish that. And the sooner we pivot, as I think was the word used earlier, the sooner that we pivot, the better.
And also looking at the staff that live in the high-risk, substantial areas in the last mapping picture there. You could see that we have staff in some of those areas as well. That's another consideration. Just a lot to consider.
And it doesn't take into consideration any staff that could have to quarantine, could potentially, just reading other school divisions, now quarantining or testing positive and tracing and so forth. So that's before we even get down that road. We're looking at those accommodations. And we have to do those accommodations individually because each one of those situations is different, which Ms. Pitts and her team, it's a great deal of effort, but also shifting guides and regulations. We now have 6 different categories that didn't exist before under Department of Labor. So we're learning this as we go and working our employees through that, but trying to keep our employees safe and educate our students, really kind of balancing those pieces.
Can you talk a little bit about what a couple of examples of accommodations might be if somebody has an issue, they stay employed, what are their options? How do they help continue to benefit the school division?
Sure. So under some flexible working arrangements, we could vary schedules, we could vary placement. It could be if they were a high-risk individual and they needed to limit their interaction, we could have them into teaching virtually in a classroom where they access from outside to come inside, reduce the amount of interaction throughout the day. That's their room, that's where they are, then they would leave from that point. We may have some instances where we have medical needs that are such that we may have an alternate placement, and that could include home for that individual because their medical condition is such that it would place their health in such jeopardy. So that's another option. I put into the manual just, flexibility and job share if we had to go that deep. Just lots of different flexible options to look at ways to ensure they're safe, but to meet, of course, the students' needs, their instructional needs. We need to have staff to be able to do that, and just kind of piecing that together. Of course, we know virtually that they could have more in their virtual classroom, so looking at that, looking at alternate positions for that person that might have or be in a high-risk area. Are there other things that they could do within the division? Do we have other needs? So we may need to, just all together say, we have to be creative, we have to work together to see how we can keep you working, and ensure that we're meeting all the mitigating strategies to keep you safe, things like that. I hope that would help give you some ideas.
One of our initial strategies, and when we met with you last, our employees who needed accommodations and our virtual students, we were really trying to pair those together so that we would be able to do a hybrid and a virtual. We just got to a point staffing wise where it no longer worked. It didn't match up, it didn't equal out. And it just became to that point that we really didn't feel like we could pull off the hybrid effectively due to those components.
Well, we can't say you didn't try. I mean, I have to say, again, I know all of you have been working hard to try to make it happen. And I know it must be really frustrating for you to work towards a goal and then to have that virtual tipping point kind of stop you in your tracks. So I think
Let's see. No, I'm sorry. I had a couple more slides. So what we would be working on, and what we've been working on, is what does the schedule for the day, week look like if we were to go virtual to start? Because we introduced a hybrid, which was every other day. We introduced a virtual, which was 4 days a week. We would want all students to be on the same schedule for families, for consistency for teachers. We have some work to do around Chromebook distribution, kindergarten through 6th grade. Really one of the biggest things that we're working on now, and somewhat feels like an insurmountable challenge, but we keep going at it every day, is really closing that internet gap. So this remote learning virtual piece does require internet connection. So we're working on some strategies, including internet cafes, pushing internet signals out, a lot of different things to really close that internet gap. Professional development will be a big part of the work we do. New teachers come back, or they don't come back, they start on Monday, and then teachers come back later that week, and really clearly outlining expectations for students, for families, and for our staff. One of the things that we talked about throughout our return to learn was the importance of having our staff on site. That was not something that we had in place in March because we couldn't, because of the governor's order and so forth, but there's no replacement for really having your staff in place and that consistency. So really working on that with our staff. We will work through variances with staff who still would need accommodation under those rules, but that would be the general expectation is to be on site. And also work with our staff, really do everything possible with our staff who wouldn't traditionally support in a virtual model. So whether it's delivering meals or whether it's supporting stand-up internet cafes and provide some supervision there. We have a list of opportunities for our staff to try to close that gap, because there are certain positions that aren't executed the same way in a virtual environment. And Team New Kent is critical to our success, and we do see a day that we open back up full, and we want to take care of our folks and continue this work together. It's a tall task, but we're committed to it. So that's some of the work ahead. But getting to an actual recommendation, feel free to ask any questions on that previous slide.
Just to add, and I think you know this already, I know a lot of parents are asking questions about a lot of these things up there, particularly Chromebook distribution, orientation for kindergartners, you know, new middle school students, new high school students. They're very anxious for that information. You know, they've been waiting, and you know, we've definitely encouraged them to be patient, but we know that each decision that is made, more communication needs to follow with it.
Yes.
So we appreciate, you know, keeping the parents informed of dates and things that are happening coming up.
Absolutely. That's a great point. And the orientation piece should also be on there as well. So recommendation in front of you, and this is a request for me to add an action item. We did not have an action item for this one. That was my timer. No.
You did well.
To request to add an action item to tonight's agenda, consider a full distance learning virtual start. and really looking at this through the first semester, but with the promise of coming back to you at each work session with, well, you'll have the health data weekly, but the health data, the staffing data, are there some opportunities for some in-person learning? So the phase guidance from the VDUA does allow us some of that opportunity with specific groups of students, special ed students, ESL students, potentially K-3. Could we start some of that along the way? I'd like to explore opportunities to do that, but in a full virtual start.
So board members, the first thing we have to do is to vote on adding an action item. It is not voting on whether to consider full distance learning virtual start to the year. So is there anything else you want to add before we add an action item?
I don't know, team, anything that
Anything you want to, folks?
or any questions that you may have? I just, not really to add, but just, this has been an incredibly, I can't even think of the word, summer. And just, the team has continued to pivot, the team has continued to evolve, school-based leaders, division leaders. We continue to get new guidance. The CDC has additional mask guidance just in the past week. So it just continues to change, it continues to shift. And every day this team that's in this room and outside this room lines up and they try to solve an impossible problem. So I'm just appreciative to get to work on a team that does that every day. And I know it's incredibly frustrating. And this is the time of the year that we're typically so excited to welcome back 3,300 families, kick off a convocation, and nothing is the way it typically is.
Okay, let's at least get the action item on the table and then we can. So do I hear a motion to amend our agenda to include an action item to consider full distance learning virtual start?
I move we amend the agenda to add an action item to consider moving to a full virtual start.
Do I hear a second?
I second.
Okay. Okay, all those in favor of adding an agenda item, an action item? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, no opposed, motion carries. Now,
We'll go ahead and do the vote.
yeah, let's just do this. We have two things on the agenda for voting. The first one is considering approval of personnel matters. Let's go ahead and do that just because we want to put this off, right? Do I hear a motion to approve personnel matters as presented?
I move that we approve personnel matters as presented.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, no one's opposed, motion carries. The next item on the agenda is, do I hear a motion to accept the superintendent's recommendations to consider to have a full distance learning virtual start to the school year?
I make a motion that we accept the superintendent's recommendation for a full virtual start to the school year.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Discussion.
Just to appreciate what Dr. Nichols and the staff has done, I understand that the amount of stress that it has caused a great deal of staff, teachers, and parents. And I think as board members, we are all sensitive to that. But under the current circumstances, as Dr. Nichols has laid out, we cannot do the students and the family justice under our current situation of not having enough staff to put in the classroom for face-to-face learning to be able to provide them the educational opportunities that they deserve at this stage of the game. And so unfortunately, I understand the dilemma that Mrs. Pitts and Dr. Nichols are under because, again, we cannot, it's just not fair to students to put them in classrooms where we don't have teachers currently. And at 42, we're at a critical number where we cannot make that up.
Any additional comments?
I think it's also important to understand that this is for the foreseeable future. This is not something that's going to quickly turn. Can you talk a little bit about what that might look like for families?
So the recommendation as we have it right now, just looking at what we know as far as health data and what we know as far as staffing data is to look at this across the first semester for a number of reasons. From the health reason, the staffing reason, from a scheduling reason, for consistency pieces, but also to look for opportunities that we can do in-person learning throughout. So, and giving families plenty of notice in trying to do those, whether it's bringing some of our youngest learners back as we look at our staffing and health data, or special populations, things of that nature, would be to kind of move in that direction as opportunities present themselves.
So what you're saying is that you're really constantly going to be looking at opportunities and perhaps bringing back smaller groups when all of the variables fall into place that's possible.
Yes, and families would still have the option, even if we found those opportunities, families would have that option to stay virtual if they so chose. We did have about 34% of our families choose a virtual path in the initial intent forms. That number has actually grown a little bit with families switching in the past couple weeks or past week. So families would have that opportunity to stay on that virtual path or be able to choose that if we were able to find a pathway or an opportunity to do that work. At some point we come back, so looking for those opportunities to do that.
One question would be, so I heard the comment about looking at having the areas where we could have opportunities for students to come in for internet cafes. I can hear a parent saying, how can you have an internet cafe and not open school? So what's the difference between that, an internet cafe, and being able to hold class?
And I think that's a great question. So one of the primary differences, just in theory, so let's take the high school because we're sitting here. So bus one pulls up to the high school, bus one kids get out. Bus one kids would go to that pod and they would only be with kids that they rode the bus in on. They'd be in one group. They wouldn't switch classes. They wouldn't move about the building. They wouldn't interact with a number of staff members. They would be with their specific New Kent personnel who would supervise the distance learning piece. They'd still be learning from their teacher on the computer and doing the independent work, and you'd have somebody there, but you wouldn't have any of that movement and any of that from a contact tracing standpoint. It would be much easier for the health department as well. And from a cleaning and mitigation, it would be a much smaller area to contain.
Would you have to have licensed teachers? Or, I mean, who would
So that's the other piece, because the students would be learning from their teachers, utilizing their Chromebooks, that it doesn't require a licensed personnel. So we could use an instructional assistant. We could use somebody from transportation. We could utilize personnel that's not traditionally utilized, wouldn't be traditionally utilized in a virtual setting. So it gives us a lot more flexibility from a staffing perspective and could actually fill a staffing need. So from a health and safety standpoint, the pod approach is a much safer way. And from a staffing standpoint, it gives us greater flexibility. You don't need a licensed chemistry teacher. You just need somebody to supervise that space.
So the students are there virtually. I mean, they're there working on their virtual learning. It's a way to address the fact that we have a county that doesn't have broadband. So it's creating these internet cafes for people to have the connectivity. But the teaching isn't going to go on there. It's just the internet connectivity to provide the students to get their work done. Yes,
Correct. And we would be able to provide transportation, we would be able to provide, potentially breakfast and lunch for students and have those pieces. But it really would be, you're in your pod during the time that the learning is going on. So you're not moving across the building, you're not really doing all those things that you would in a typical school day. It's just really a measure to try to close that internet gap that we were talking about earlier in a safe, responsible way.
Have y'all thought about how to handle acoustics in that scenario? You're gonna have maybe 20 kids doing 20 different things. They're gonna have their Chromebooks running. Are they gonna be required to have
Yes.
AirPods or?
Yeah, they would be required to have
headphones.
headphones.
Not
I know, I couldn't think of another word.
No,
Okay.
yeah, no, it would be, headphone based.
Dr. Nichols, what would be the timing on that? Like, what time would they start? What time would they end? Would they get a break? All that kind of stuff for those folks. And I would make the assumption, based on what Dr. Harding said, the sole purpose is the only people that would qualify for an internet cafe are those who have said, I have basically no internet access. Because what we don't want to do is potentially set up a system where anybody can jump on a bus and come to school now.
Right.
And we need to qualify that to
Yes.
make sure that that is put out there, that the only people who are qualified to come to an internet cafe are those who do not have internet service.
Or high-speed, reliable internet.
Right.
So that's right.
And we would have to, and I mean, we have to qualify that, but we gotta make sure,
Yeah.
I mean, we gotta make sure of that, because we don't want that to turn into,
Yes.
we're going 5 times to the same subdivision
Right.
or to the same area.
Well, and the other part of it is it's really not, if I understand it correctly, it's only for like enough, a couple of hours, and I say a couple, I don't know, what are you thinking, 3-4 hours at the most?
Yeah, like at the most 4.5 is.
Okay, because, so it's for you to come and get your work done,
Yes.
We would have breakfast and lunch
right?
provided. Yeah.
Okay,
So,
And
Right.
one of the clarifications is we wouldn't need licensed personnel with the students. We're still using our teachers.
the teachers are
The
gonna.
teachers are still
Delivering,
planning
yes.
all the instruction, delivering it on the,
Right,
I just want to make sure that's clear.
right,
And that wasn't
Sure.
coming quite through, so.
right, okay. No, that
But from a
makes sense.
supervision standpoint, we
Right.
can use the existing personnel, would be the clarification.
And our teachers are still in their classrooms working on site.
Some of our other staff would be assisting in the internet cafe. So that would be a creative way, like we talked about, to help them continue working and assisting in a different role than what they're used to doing on a day-to-day basis.
Actually, the internet cafe is a community service. It's because we don't have internet. If we don't have broadband, that we're going to create these locations where people can come and have internet. And it's a community service. It's not exactly an educational service. The education's in the computer. They're having virtual opportunities with their real licensed teacher, right?
Yes.
And it's important to note that all of the guidelines in our health safety plan
Mhm.
still have to be followed in an internet cafe setting. So mask wearing, all the mitigation pieces. So everything outlined in, just because you're coming in an internet cafe doesn't mean that these things aren't still part of
Right.
the program. All health safety plans still have to be followed, even setting up an internet cafe. And just for us, we know this is less than ideal, but it's another opportunity to try to do a little more and try to reach out and provide that service. So a lot of logistics to work out, working with our schools, working with our principals, and working with the team to Ms. Winford's point, to communicate that to families, to talk to people with the setup, to do some routing, to make sure we can provide the meals and all of those pieces behind the scenes.
I know there's a lot of discussion. So return to learn, can that continue to be open for parents to put questions? And can we continue to encourage parents who have questions to submit those to return to learn? Because I think sometimes the train leaves the tracks on social media and people get incorrect information. So
Yes. one of the things that we can do as well, Dr. Harding, so yes, we can keep that open and we can keep working through that piece. Another thing that we can do, and I'm not gonna look at any of the team while I say this, because I haven't shared it with them, is to update our return to learn page.
Yeah.
Based on the board's vote. So right now it's the hybrid and the virtual piece. What we would do this week is really add a level of detail around the virtual side of things, or we've modified to match the decision of the board, I guess is what I'm saying, and try to answer that in some frequently asked questions and so forth.
So teachers report next week, new teachers report next Monday.
New teachers are on Monday. I think all staff is Thursday.
What is a realistic expectation for parents to expect as far as a timeline with some of the information coming through? I realize it's not going to be available tomorrow, but what can we say to parents who are looking for dates for a lot of this information?
We are meeting tomorrow as a division leadership team. And one of the things that we don't want to go too far down this road, I had a board decision and those pieces, but tomorrow afternoon we have principals and division leadership teams. So that is one of the items is to be able to communicate to families Wednesday with those pieces as best we know them, but really want to work those through with the principals and tailor it to the school and a communication plan around it. So I would say by Wednesday, Thursday, families would have an idea of the flow of those details.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions, board members?
I'm sorry. go ahead, Tim.
So if my child was scheduled to go in the hybrid model, now he's going virtual, will he, or is there any difference in the teachers that he would receive if we come out and go back into hybrid down the road? Does he end up with a different teacher? How would that work?
If those are the logistics we would have to work through. So, and that's another, for majority of students this semester is a nice point to look at that specifically at the high school, because you take over a new set of courses. But yeah, we would have to minimize that sort of movement. So as best as possible, having kids who chose virtual together and kids that chose hybrid on that scheduling side of things, and then minimizing the movement. Easier said than done. I will tell you that the school leaders have done a phenomenal job trying to do that scheduling to minimize that movement. I would also give families the opportunity when we are able to shift, even if you didn't choose hybrid, but you found the virtual experience to work for your families, that you would be able to continue on that piece as well. So we'd make every effort to minimize that, but there would be some of that shift. We would just need to pick a good stopping point to make that shift, whether it's a 9 weeks or semester or whatever the case would be.
Dr. Nichols, I have a quick question for you. What about K through second grade? Would they be able to have Chromebooks as well?
Yes, correct. We're going to distribute Chromebooks to all students, 7 through 12. I'll get it right at some point. Already have them. So we'd be distributing, K-6 prior to school starting, and also setting up online orientations, both for what virtual schooling would look like, and then specific orientations, which Ms. Swimper mentioned around kindergarten, 6th grade, and so forth. So yes, we have the Chromebooks handled. And like I said, those are existing Chromebooks that we had in place. We will be looking at replacement cycles and so forth, but yes.
For these opportunities of even virtual, how will, or is there any clarification? Because I know that I've had some questions from parents about what is going to be, or what's going to be the protocol for SOLs.
Yeah.
Because they're going to ask that from a virtual standpoint of view, and as a division, if there's certain students, how is that to clarify that to those parents for SOLs?
So we did get word from the State Department that accreditation has been waived. So your performance on an SOL test specifically won't matter for the student or accreditation. But the fact that we have to take tests is a federal mandate and not a state mandate, and we have gotten no relief from the federal side of things that we won't have to still administer the tests. So kids will still learn the content. The team has done a great job on the curriculum front from spiraling in some of the content that kids missed or gaps that may occur between March and June. But the assessments, at least for this year, will not connect to a student's performance. They will be used as growth measures. So one of the things that we'll do, even going virtual, would be to have student growth measures to see where kids are, what the gaps are, and then measure again in the spring. We'll do that internally. But the SOL piece will also give us a growth measure for kids.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the high stakes side of it is gone, which is a great thing. As an educator, we've all often said, what would we do if there wasn't a high stakes testing environment? There's not. There's no accreditation this year. What is possible? What could you do with your kids without that high stakes piece in place?
So so it sounds as if you're still gonna be using a variety of assessments to kind of look at growth and see where children are. Because a lot of times parents talk about the fact that their students are gonna fall behind. And on the one hand, I would say, well, we're all behind, and we're all gonna be moving forward. But it sounds like there's even more to that, in that you're saying there's going to be accountability and assessment in terms of that student's knowledge, and you're gonna continue to work on that.
Yes.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
And some of the bigger things, not for discussion tonight, but we can certainly put it on a future one, is just looking at our calendar, looking at what summer looks like. What are some opportunities that we can do some really engaging, interesting work with our students, hopefully in a different health environment.
So would you go as far as to advise families not to make plans for summer?
I think what this situation has taught us more than anything is flexibility. So
Right.
I would be, the team and I, just continuing to be flexible with time, with schedule, with so forth. There will be some pretty enriching opportunities this summer for kids and families, both to close gaps if gaps exist, but also to accelerate. And I see that being the future of our work.
Other questions? I know we're going to have a lot of questions going forward.
Absolutely.
Thank you all for allowing us to ask the questions, and thank you for allowing us to ask them in the future, because we will. But if there are no other questions, I need a motion to, we've already done that.
Yeah, we did.
We did it.
We did our motion on our side.
Okay, so there's a motion on the floor. All of those in favor of the superintendent's recommendation to move to full distance learning, virtual start to the year, please say aye.
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 Aye. Did Andrea vote?
She did.
She did.
Aye.
Okay, any no's? Motion carries. A lot to be continued. We will do our best to answer all of the parents' questions. I hope that they will be patient. And I know that the level of frustration for parents has got to be off the charts. I hope they understand that while this falls on our doorstep, it is something that our community and state and nation could never have imagined. And we will continue to do the best. And you've got an incredible team here that does an incredible job, and just work with us.
I would, so just put out a plea of sorts. We have a lot of good community support. I think this is an opportunity for us to rally as a community, whether it's faith-based community organizations, or we can come together and close these gaps. So if you're interested in doing that work, I'm going to do some convenings of some groups, but feel free to reach out to me. We work through this together. So New Kent Strong isn't just a hashtag. It's all of us coming together. So community organizations, schools, you name it, we're all in this together. We're all going to get to the other side of this together. But just stay tuned and let's support each other through this.
Just a quick question. Are we still, even under this current model, that when is the actual start date of school?
So that's, I guess the good news is that we haven't moved the date. September 8th is still the official first day of school.
I just want to make sure we clarify that for everyone who is
Right.
listening, because that was kind of always this rolling thing that we never really honed in on calendar wise of when the actual start date will occur. And when now we have to work backwards from that to get all of that other information solidified to the parents and the teachers.
And we will produce a calendar that kind of walks you through those pieces for the first semester. So we'll have that in place as well. But yes, I have seen some school divisions moving past Labor Day and going to September 14th or 15th. That is not in our intent. We will line up and be ready virtually to start.
And so there will be communications going out to families, letting them know that there's been a change, robocall, YouTube, email,
Yes.
et cetera.
Yep. So this, yes, YouTube, Facebook, robocall, website, email, all of that this week, just confirming those pieces and directing them to some of those dates. Yes. Some of those confirmation pieces.
Okay, if there is no other information tonight, our work session is adjourned.
Thank you, Dr. Nichols. Thank you, staff.
Thank you, sir.